through the hot red tides of sin.
This is Faith Blind
Counsel.
Everything is within.
You create the light.
We are one.
That's it.
This is an episode of our show that we're doing, and we are talking about Western tropical astrology. I am Frater Dreadnought.
Frater Yaramarud.
Seda Cologne.
Here, that's us. We did it. We got ourselves introduced within 1 minute of the show starting. We somehow did it. Anyways.
And we're doing it in the morning, and so we're all punctual and shit.
This is awful. I hate recording in the morning.
I don't like it at all.
The sun's too bright.
This is the sacrifice we're making for you. All right, so Western tropical astrology. Let's talk about it. Let's be about it. There are, to start out with, a few disclaimers. Number one, there are 3 different types of astrology that are, like, really popular. We're only talking about one of them today. The other 2, there's sidereal astrology, and there is traditional Chinese astrology, which we're not really going to talk about today so much, other than to give a really quick overview as to they are different. Western tropical,
but just as fucking complex,
if not more so.
Yeah.
So Western tropical astrology is the astrology that most people think of as like Starbucks astrology of like, what's your sign? I'm being such a Virgo. Like, that's what they think of, right? Sidereal astrology it uses the same symbolism. It interprets a little bit differently, and the thing that sidereal astrology does is it accounts for the precession of the equinoxes and for galactic, like, celestial drift. So things change roughly to the tune of, like, 1 degree every 72 years or something like that. And then traditional Chinese astrology is, it's going off of the Chinese calendar. So that's a little different.
That's
like,
and
really
that's based
different.
on lunar months and shit.
There's also from the little bit that I've read on it, it has a lot to do with like the year, the month, the day, and the hour you were born. And those give you different signs. There's also different. It plays off of the 5 elements a lot more.
Yep.
And what I want to say,
the five Chinese elements.
Yes.
So, like wood, metal, air, or fire. There's another one, water probably.
But I bring all of that up to say that we will do episodes on sidereal and traditional Chinese astrology at some point, but they are very complex, and they're things that require a lot of different research. So with that being said, let's talk about just traditional Western tropical astrology, which for most people in the West, this is what they think of when they think of astrology. And I want to start out by asking you, Yara, and you, Cologne, what your understanding of astrology is.
Okay. I don't know a whole lot. I know a bit about the history of it. So it was started by the ancient Babylonians, which is why there's Babylonians having started it. That's why there's similarities between all of the other systems. So you have 12 circles in a wheel of 360 degrees. It's because the Babylonians, they counted in base 60. So all of the things on there are divisible by 60 or like within numbers of that. And it's early. So So that's why, like, 360 is divisible by 60, like, 12 is, like, 60 is divisible by 12, because there are 12 zodiac symbols, and that goes over to Chinese and sidereal and whatever as well. But then, like, it wasn't until, like, the ancient Greeks with Hellenism or like that shit that it really like picked up and started becoming like, hey, we need to pay more attention to this, and it became more of like a science. And astrology and astronomy were entirely the same fucking thing up until we stopped believing that the Earth is the center of the universe. And then after that, it kind of split off, and they're like, no, you're fucking dumb for thinking the stars do anything. Yeah, well, you're fucking dumb for thinking that the sun is important. Or so
Early morning history with Yara.
I could just listen to this forever.
Do we know any animators?
Like what we need to do, we need to just like I'm gonna talk to Zarina to have her just wake you up at like 8:30 in the morning and just like ask you some historical question, so you'll just start rambling about it, and then record it for me so I can listen to it.
Yeah. So altogether, in summary, the astrology is the sun is dumb, and so are we, and for thinking that it's important, and, yeah, this is some pretty dope OJ, so.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
All right. Cologne, what is your, like, understanding or, like, what when someone starts talking to you about astrology, how quickly do you just zone out and you're just like, okay?
Is it going to be more coherent than my answer?
I hope not.
I mean, I really have mostly as a lay person's understanding of astrology, which is, oh, you're born in these dates, and that means you have supposedly these characteristics. I mean, I do know about like getting like the full like chart done and have like vaguely about the houses and like having your sun and your moon and those sort of things. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know the history of how that came about, and I don't really, have a strong understanding of what each of those things are.
So that's something that we get into a lot more in the interview section of this episode. We have
someone who actually knows things. We have Selah is on the show, and she's going to be talking to us here in a little bit about astrology and all of the shit that we don't know about it. But
which is everything,
pretty much.
Yeah.
So a lot of like the TLDR on that is a lot of people see astrology as like these signs, right? You have your sun sign, your moon sign, your ascendant sign. Those, most people really only think of their sun sign when someone asks you what your sign is, they're talking about your sun sign, right? But there's a sign for each one of the planets. There's also the sun, the moon, and then there's what's called your ascendant sign. These are all things that play together. And
see exactly what I said. The sun is not important.
Okay. I mean, yeah. All right. But what's more important than any individual sign is the relationship between them, right? So there's a relationship between not only the 12 signs of the zodiac, but there's a relationship between all of the planets. And those are called aspects. You determine a relationship based on the angle between the two given signs. And, like, that's how you figure out how they play together. And it's kind of like tarot, and I think we bring that up, too, where, like, when you're reading tarot, what's more important than the individual cards is the relationship between the cards. What came before that card in the spread? What came after that card in the spread? What, like, you know, how do they work together? And that's something that's really, really complex. So in Liber MMM, when Carol is talking about picking a method of divination and he steers people away from astrology, he basically says something to the effect of, like, it's so subjective and blah, 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 blah. But realistically, what it is there's just entirely too much information. Like, there's so much going on that, like, you can kind of make it into anything. And that's why, like, when people pull, like, they go to some fucking, you know, website somewhere, they get a pre-generated natal chart, and it's full of a lot of general information that, like, could just as well apply to anything. It's because you're relying on basically pre-written script that isn't able to extrapolate these relationships, like the aspects, the angles between, like, okay, these two signs are conjunct. These two signs are opposed to each other. These two signs are squared, etc., etc. There's too much there for, like, the way that we have, like, scripting technology now to realistically draw a full picture from. I forget where I was at the start of that rant. And
yeah, it's okay. You lost me about halfway through too.
Anyways, so one thing I did want to touch on before we get into the interview is the idea of ephemeral astrology. And ephemeral astrology kind of comes from, you had talked about, like, the history of astrology. Nowadays, when people think about astrology, they largely think in terms of natal charts and, like, daily horoscopes, right? Those are things that where, like, a natal chart is kind of like you can look at it and try and ascertain something about somebody's personality or, like, the content of somebody's character. A horoscope is used kind of like a divination tool where, like, you're casting this chart, and it's really the same tool. You're casting a natal chart, but you're casting it for that day. And then you're looking at all the same information of seeing where this, you know, where the planets are, what angles are where, and you can ascertain what's going to happen, you know, what to look out for in the coming day, week, month, whatever the fuck ever, right? That kind of plays into what ephemeral astrology is, which was more classic, like, you were looking and casting charts for days in the future. And you were using that information to plan events. So, like, John Dee did a lot of astrology for the royal court, and he did it by casting for, like, ephemerides of, like, okay, this is a good time to do a coronation because X, Y, and Z in the, you know, in the Zodiac that will be happening on this day at this time. So yeah. What like ephemeral astrology is basically, like, using that to inform magically something you would want to do. So one of the things, and I'll touch on it just really quickly here, is the idea there are 15 major fixed stars in astrology. And what fixed stars means is they don't move the same way that the planets move, right? So your planets are on a rotation. You know, they're changing, they're moving through the zodiac. The stars more or less stay the same. They drift slightly every, like, 70, 72 years. They move a little bit, right? But these stars have, you know, esoterically, they have certain properties, right? Like, there's, you know, the demon star Algol is, like, a warmongering bastard. Like, if you want to, like, make war, that's the time, right? Traditionally, like, generals and, you know, like, officers would not start fights unless there were certain, like, ephemerides, there were certain conjuncts with Algol. There's other stars that do other shit. Regulus is another one that basically, Regulus is about taking agency, taking power, or, like, curbing tyranny, right? what ephemeral...
Regulus the regulator.
Yeah, basically.
Boom.
But what you're doing is, with ephemeral astrology, you are looking for lining up, like, things lining up with those, like, spots. And they're fixed on the zodiac wheel. So, like, Regulus is, I think, like, 29 degrees Leo or something like that.
I'm going to take absolutely 100% of your word on everything
Yeah.
you say with this.
Sounds
So
good.
don't just say it with confidence, because I'm going to believe it regardless.
Okay, so here's one that I do know for certain. Algorab, right? Algorab, however you pronounce it, is 13 degrees Libra, right?
Got it.
So what you would want to do, and that's actually coming up on the 28th, right? So what you'd want to do is, when the ascendant is in line at 13 degrees Libra and another planet, right? So whatever it is you want to work with. Usually the easiest one to use is the moon, because the moon orbits the fastest. It transits the fastest through the zodiac, but you can line up with other planets too, right? It's just gonna take some more time. But, like, you wait for all three of those things to line up. It's where you get that, like, shitty trope in cult movies where they're like, oh, the planets are aligned, or whatever, right? But you wait for those three things to line up, because what happens is you have the ascendant and the midheaven. Both of those separately will amplify whatever they're aligned with. One way, it's like a transceiver, right? It amplifies going both ways. So you have the star moving through the ascendant, which amplifies the aspect of that star. So, like, a powerful star that's about, taking the power back. It's going through the ascendant. That's bringing that energy up. And then you have the planet, which represents, an aspect of our personality, or an aspect of, like, your will or your magic that you would want to do. So when all three of those things are lined up, you are working at a time where it is, like, very synchronous. Everything is in line. Everything's working together. You're raising up that energy to do that work. That is, in a nutshell, what ephemeral astrology is. There's a lot more to it, because you also are, like, taking into account the rest of the natal chart. Like, okay, these things are in line, but it's opposed to all of this shit, right? It's easy to get lost in that rabbit hole.
Yeah, the closest I've done to, like, any sort of ephemeral astrology is, like, you had mentioned the moon, doing things as in accordance to the phases of the moon. So, like, if the moon is waning, then that's when you do certain rituals or whatever to, like, get rid of things. Or if it's waxing, that's when you do things to, like, gain things or have things increase.
Yeah, exactly. So that actually makes me think of one of the most common forms of ephemeral astrological magic, charging moon water. Charging moon water is one of the most classic examples. The moon's full, it's out, you're good to go, you put your moon water out and you charge it. You can only do it at that time because you are harnessing that power. That is ephemeral astrology.
Right, and then the other one that I've done is just doing things within their planetary hours.
Yeah. So those planetary hours, and I could be wrong on this, but those planetary hours were determined by transitions. They were determined by those planets moving through some phase of the zodiac at some point.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I wasn't alive.
No, that sounds
then.
about right. And I'm not in a place right now where I'm going to disagree with you. So just for the sake of total transparency, I am relatively new to all of this. I've just started working with it a couple of months ago, working it into my practice. And the thing that I've found with it that really slaps with me is, like, the idea of working with a god form in general has always felt a little hokey to me. Like, they're like, oh, well, I'm calling upon, whomever. I'm calling upon Dionysus to do something. And, like, in the back of my head, there's always that little, like,
snot-nosed punk voice that's like, these are all made up. We made all of these up. Like, these gods are all made up. They're all fucking fake. None of them are real.
I mean, it's the same with astrology, too.
Yeah.
Like, we just decided, hey, that thing over there kind of looks like a lion, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like a fucking connect the dots thing, except it's really, really shitty.
However,
it's only got like 4 points.
However, at the very least, those stars are physically observable. Like, I can look up and see them with a mid-range telescope. Like, and for that, like, it's still all made up. Like, the constellations that we look at from Earth and see, like, oh, that's, Virgo, that's whatever. It's all fake. It's all made up. That's all shit those are stars that are hundreds of light years away from each other and thousands of light years away from Earth, right? We might be looking at something that's already gone supernova, that's already dead, and we just don't know it yet, right? But
yeah, good. Serves that star right for trying to tell me what to do with my life.
But it's at least, in my head, it's at least physically observable, and therefore, that's one less thing that I have to, talk myself around, basically. And, realistically, most of the god forms that we work with were made up by people looking at the stars.
Yeah. I mean, and astrology was one of those things. It was, along with the sun, it was mankind's first method of trying to figure out a pattern to the universe. So, it was like, hey, well, the sun, this bright ball that keeps ruining things every day and being way too fucking bright keeps coming up and ruining my perfect view of this night sky, but it keeps showing up in different places. And then they started tracking that, and they're like, oh, it keeps ruining my day at the same time every year. And so, yeah, astrology was kind of our first, oh, this is what it's doing. That's good. And that and the seasons and all of that shit, that was us. And so that's how all religions just boiled down to worshiping the sun, really.
Yeah, because it's all just making shit up. Everything is made up. It's all bullshit. Just do whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah, go back to bed and keep dreaming about me having a 1961 Oldsmobile.
Or go back to bed and dream about you having an infinite supply of OJ.
No, that's cool. This OJ is pretty dope. Yeah, I'm just fucking slugging this 2 quarts of orange juice.
Good. Very good. So let's go ahead and just launch right into this fucking interview, man. I'm real excited about it. It's pretty dope. It's also it's a lot girthier than our last couple of interviews. So prepare for that. It's gonna be dope.
Prepare for the girth.
We'd like to take this time to acknowledge our partnership with our sponsor, Welcome to Paradise. Not only do they carry occult and ritual items that have been personally vetted and created by practicing occultists, they've partnered up with the Faithblind Council to provide you with exclusive offerings from your hosts. Tarot consultations by Dreadnought, hand-carved leather by Cologne, and custom talismans from Yaramarud are just a few of the items sold by Welcome to Paradise in their collection of occult artists. If you're a magical artist looking for a place to showcase your goods, why not join the Paradise team? Whether it's to sell your work or to add another piece to your collection, please visit our sponsors at welcometoparadise.com.
So this is our interview about Western tropical astrology. We are joined by someone who knows more than us about it, but that's kind of like climbing the highest hill in the lowest valley. We're here.
I don't know a big about this, so yeah.
It's gonna be a real interesting experience Selah, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit.
Hello, I am Sor Selah, and I know these people.
You would admit to that? Just
Not publicly.
just point blank?
This is gonna be a really awkward episode.
That's the sound of a flatline.
So we're going to talk a little bit about, again, Western tropical astrology and kind of break down what a lot of the very basic elements of it are to kind of get rid of that weird Starbucks stigma behind astrology and hopefully explain some of the more, like, intricate meaning behind it.
Yeah, this is something that I've been studying for a very long time and still have only, I've only really traversed, like, the foothills of that fucking mountain. Like, this is one of those areas of study that has a lot of layers to it. They all play together. So if you want to think of it in terms of complexity, as similar to, like, the tarot or Kabbalah, there's a lot there to look at and to put together. So if you're the type of person who really likes having those different layers playing together, this may be something that is of very deep interest to you because you can go a lot of ways with it. We're not going to go a lot of ways in this conversation because there's just too much to cover.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth bringing up, when reading Liber MMM, like, Carol specifically suggests not going with astrology because of how complex it is. And I think it's worth, like, it says something that Carol's advice is basically, astrology is too complex. Try something simpler like tarot.
Listen here, dummy. Here's what you need to do, you stupid.
Well, and I think another thing about it is a friend had mentioned a theory that his aversion to getting into astrology also had something to do with the idea that it predetermines situations or personalities, and that was something that, you know, Carol potentially just fundamentally disagreed with. But
Right, and that critique of astrology stretches back to ancient Greece, where there, like, one of the philosophers, I forget who, it might have been Heraclitus, but he had said, like, no, astrology doesn't work because it presupposes predestination and does not allow for free will.
I'm just not going to listen to a guy named Cletus. I'm sorry. I'm not doing it.
I have a philodendron that I named Cletus.
So I guess my big thing with learning astrology, because I've felt that way about it for a long time, but like it or not, astrology very much is its own egregore now. Enough people believe in it and use it in a practical way that it holds sway in one way, shape, or form.
Well, it's been like that for thousands of years. Like, astrology was the precursor to astronomy, and for all intents and purposes, prior to Ptolemy and with like heliocentrism, that was the study of the stars. Astrology was the same thing. And it wasn't until about the 17th century that astrology and astronomy kind of split.
Yeah. That's, and, like, one of the things, so I've been doing this weird, like, kind of study of trying to find black holes and, like, figure out where they would go on the Zodiac wheel. And the thing that I keep running into is, like, a very basic problem, and that very basic problem is that the constellations that astrology is based on, by and large, are not real. And that is to say, not that they aren't actual constellations, but that their association, like, you associate these stars only because of how they look from Earth. To try and map things, you know, celestially, We're talking about shit that is potentially hundreds or thousands of light years apart, and they just look that way from Earth. So, like, you have to kind of go into it with this idea that, like, it's a system that's made just like any other, but there are things that are at least, like, there are things that are physically observable, even if that observation is from a very, like a very not objective point.
Right. I mean, you're looking up at the sky and you're seeing all of these stars as kind of a flat plane, when in reality it's 3-dimensional. Like, you're looking at a 3-dimensional model in 2D.
Realistically, you're looking at a 4-dimensional model because you're seeing things that are so far away that, like, you're observing something that's 10,000 years old.
Yeah, like the star Betelgeuse, for all we know, has already gone into supernova. We just haven't seen the effects of that yet.
Yes, absolutely. But anyways, let's get into some of the astrology stuff before I could go on a tangent about, like, all the shit that I don't know about space forever. So let's just avoid that pitfall.
Yeah.
And let's get into astrology. So, Selah, what would you say if you were talking about astrology? What is the thing that, like, the biggest misconception?
Well, you know, I think what's really important about astrology is, again, if you treat it as though it's an egregore for your own magical practice, you can think it's a bunch of shit. You can think that it's complete garbage, but it's still good because it's so pervasive, to be able to understand what people are talking about it when they make references to it. And it's also important to be able to speak that language, even if you don't really understand it in depth. So, you know, even if it is bullshit, if you were to look at certain astrological events or traits that are described as being associated with certain planetary arrangements in the sky and so forth, if you can look at a situation that would relate to that and see that there is a correlation between what is described as how things should happen or how a person should act, and it lines up, I mean, is that a synchronicity? Like, aren't synchronicities some indication that there is some, you know, possible value to... Does that make sense?
Yeah, what you're saying is it doesn't matter how logical it is. If the thing is there and there's a positive connection, then is it any different than a synchronicity? Is it any different than I jerked off on a piece of paper and then found $20?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what you get from astrology is going to be very personal, and how much value you ascribe to it is going to be very personal. But at the very least, to be able to understand what people are talking about, if you don't know much about astrology, it's going to help you have a conversation where you feel confident being, you know, actually engaged and feeling like you have something, you know.
Yeah, so I would like to add two things. First of all, I kind of fall within... Personally, I've never touched on astrology, and that's part of the reason where I know absolutely dick about it. And a big reason for that is, I mean, I guess you could say it's skepticism, but it's more like there are far too many unanswered questions as far as I'm concerned, or that questions that have not been answered to my liking. So because of that, I was just like, fuck it, I'm not going to deal with it at all. And
it's too many. Yeah. No, I get it.
But at the same time, I'm, like you had said, versed in it enough that I can have a somewhat of a conversation with it and somewhat pick up on things. Like, I know that with my natal chart, according to astrology, I was born as a dumpster fire. And
I don't disagree with that.
No. And so, like, that's my trash life has just existed kind of predetermined by the stars. And I get it. I understand that much.
Well, and I think to go back to what you were asking, because I didn't actually answer your question.
I wasn't going to say anything. I was going to let it slide.
Well, I think I kind of assumed what you were asking before I had really processed what you asked. But I think that one of the things that people do misunderstand about astrology is that these planets don't act in a vacuum. Like, the reason why astrology is so complex is because all of these different planets, especially talking about your natal chart, which I think is something that's probably the most applicable to the listener base. It's not just like your Venus is in Capricorn and therefore like, your Venus is also in conjunction with another planet and they're going to play off of each other. There are a lot of different, more complicated things that are going on within these charts that they don't really go into a lot of detail if you're just pulling up an online natal report, because most of the websites don't have the types of algorithms, I guess, to be able to pull them all together and make it cohesive so that it makes sense for you. There are a lot of different relationships that happen within the natal charts based on like angles on that wheel. Like when you get that printout of your natal chart, it looks like a big circle cut up into 12 slices of pie. And depending on where these different planets rest on that chart is going to determine a relationship that planet has with another planet, or even with its own space inside of that wheel. So it gets pretty complex, and that's really the part that people are missing. Like it's a very rich thing that's happening here between all of these different planets and the interplay between these different relationships that are going on in just this one circle that you're looking at. So you can go online and you can pull up your thing that says your sun is this, your moon is this, and your rising sign is this, and this means about you. And it's probably not going to be totally wrong, but it's also probably going to be pretty vague, fairly general, and like on any given day, you might be able to slap that description on somebody else and be like, but it him too. When it comes to how you act as a person and the way that your natal chart supposedly affects that, you really have to look at some of the deeper connections that are in there. And in order to do that, you have to be able to actually make some sense of that wheel that you're looking at.
Yeah, like I'm looking at my natal chart right now, and first of all, it looks like a pie, like you said, except one that I tried to cut during one of my many drunken nights trying to get just a perfect triangle. But along with that, there's a bunch of fucking numbers that I don't know what those fucking things mean. I see a lot of like 30s and a 6. There's a few 6s in there.
Dope. That's pretty fucking metal, dude.
I definitely see 3 6s.
Yeah. Fuck yeah!
Fucking metal as fuck, dude.
I'll take it.
So I think for the purposes of people who are really just learning about what all of this is, so you have 12 different signs in the Western Zodiac. Each one has a sort of, if you would think of it like a mythological god. All of these are basically based off of or ruled by a mythological god, and the signs themselves take on the personalities or the traits of that deity or that entity. So there's a lot to be said about what each one of those signs like looks like and what traits are associated with those signs. There's a really good YouTube video that describes it all in about 10 minutes. It's by a guy named Quan Tracy Cherry. He's actually an astrologer that's local to the Kansas City area. But he basically breaks it down as like, Aries, you're like this. Taurus, you're like this. But he's very succinct. So if you are really, really starting out super, super fresh, I would look that up. Maybe we can link that.
Yeah, we can put that link in and definitely like actually like pause this episode, take like 10 minutes and go watch this video, because the dude basically sums every sign up as far as an archetype goes in about a minute, give or take, per
So
sign.
it's a pretty quick watch, and I think it really, like, it hits a lot of the good and bad. You know, you think of, like, okay, like, let's talk about Gemini. Geminis, shout out to you, okay? Because you're not as crazy as people talk about, but you are. But, but like, there's reasons for that. There's good and there's bad. The thing about Gemini, it's ruled by Mercury. Mercury is the god that governs communication and thought. So these are people that are constantly thinking. They're constantly talking. They're constantly looking for answers. They get a bad rap for, you know, being two-faced, like acting one way, acting another way, like it's totally natural, and like, you know, ain't nothing wrong with me switching back and forth. But the thing about it is that in the nature of Gemini, because they can see all of this information and they can process all this information, you know, they can also give equal value to both sides and every other side. They can go to any part of this argument and fight for it. Like Libra gets the gold star for being all diplomatic and being able to balance everything and be fair, but really Gemini is probably the most fair sign in the zodiac because they can equally value things, whether it's going to hurt somebody's feelings or not, as where Libra is looking more for harmony. So these are kind of some of the things that, like, that video, for example, touches on. Each one of these signs has personalities where you've got what we see as a positive aspect, and you also have a negative aspect. It all comes from the same place. It has to do with how we interpret those actions that are resulting because of that personality trait or whatever.
So if you have the 12 signs, and these 12 signs all have specific kind of archetypes to them, how then do, like, the planets play into that?
All right, so there's a couple of different ways. Number one, you as a person are going to be affected by certain planets because they are ruled by certain deities. They're going to affect things like, for example, well, let's just talk about the big three first. You've got your sun, your moon, and your rising sign. And these are all things that are going to affect the biggest, most obvious parts of your personality. Your sun sign is kind of like, this is you. This is where you're coming from. If you're a Taurus, you're somebody who likes stability. You like nice things. You like good food. You probably buy too many shoes, whatever. These are like general descriptions, right? Well, put that general description to the side. Your rising sign or your ascendant is kind of like the inner you, or like the real you. It's sort of filtered through your sun sign. They play together. So if you're a Taurus, but your rising sign is Cancer. Cancers are known to be very sensitive. They're very protective. They're very, like, I don't know what, maternal, domestic. These are the descriptions that you hear for these signs. So you put these two things together. You get a Taurus whose sun in Taurus, rising sign is Cancer. They're going to have traits of both sides. And then your moon sign is said to dictate how your emotions operate. So if their moon sign is also Scorpio, like, fuck, don't fuck with them. This bitch gonna be crazy, okay?
So the way that I like to think of putting those three signs together, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you have, because I've been told by you and by a couple other people that, like, the way to really look at it is, like, the ascendant sign is the real you. The sun sign is the face that you put out to other people. So, like, if the ascendant sign is what's happening, the sun sign is the output of that information, and then your moon sign is basically how you are processing that, like, transaction, basically.
That's not a bad way to look at it. I mean, different people will describe it in different ways, but they're essentially saying the same thing. Like, to me, the ascendant is more like, this is the real you, but you're going to display the traits of that sign in the way that your sun sign would display those traits. So if the real you is that Cancer and you're real soft and squidgy inside and you like soft things, you like comfort, and you like creamy foods,
and you have to be loved,
and you're real sarcastic and like when you whatever it is. And by the way, I'm not beating up on anybody who's got a sun in Taurus and a rising sign in Cancer and a moon sign.
I like creamy foods, and I'm very, very soft because I'm an
Aquarius.
Aquarius.
Oh my God, your moon is in Cancer.
God damn it!
No, but you know, the thing is that you're going to display those signs, those traits in the way that a Taurus would display them, or vice versa. You can look at it either way, but both of those signs are going to play very, very closely together. Okay, your moon sign then is, yes, how you're processing things, but how you're processing things emotionally. Like, how do I feel about this? How do I feel about the situations that I'm in? How am I going to react in emotional situations? And that does also, you know, play through those other signs. But you're going through, like, your sun and your ascendant are your major filters, especially in the beginning of your life. There's some disagreement as to whether or not the ascendant really affects you that much as you get older, but we're not going to go into that.
So if the ascendant is you drinking too much alcohol, and the sun sign is you then throwing up in the morning, the moon sign is your liver just doing its best.
Okay, yeah, sure. I don't know. No. Maybe. Yes.
Your analogy is garbage, and you are garbage.
Am I allowed to call him his name?
We'll edit around it. It'll be fine. Okay, so sun, moon, ascendant. Those are like the ones. Those three signs are the ones that are most personal.
Correct. But remember, I was saying there's two different ways that the planets are going to affect you, which was part of your question. The other thing has to do with, all right, so this is all you have to know what time you were born and where to really accurately get this information, because it's based on your ascendant, but there's a system of houses.
Yeah, okay, that's the bit that I have no idea what the fuck it is. Like, houses.
Getting into some more complex shit, but
fuck.
Basically, where, and I won't go into that description right this second, but basically, depending on what house that planet sits in is also going to have a potential effect on you or situations. I mean, all of this applies to situational astrology as well, but I think for the purposes of this episode, we should probably just focus on like natal charts, because those are applicable to us, and that's an easy way for us to learn about how these things play together. We can look at ourselves. If you have a close friend or family member and you know their birthday, you know where they were born, you can look up their stuff too, and you can start to apply what these things mean with somebody that you know well.
So would you say that it's fair, like, to think of doing a natal chart almost like reverse engineering all of these symbols and the archetypes associated with them, because you have something like you yourself that, however, you know, biased your own perception of yourself is, in your, like, in the subcockles of your heart, you know yourself.
Yes, this is the deconstructed menu. This is the farm to table, deconstructed, you on a plate.
Okay. All
Don't
right.
serve me my bullshit on a shovel.
So let's I think let me go into houses a little bit really quickly, because I do think that this has a pretty major effect when you're looking at a natal chart. And not everybody subscribes to all of these different things. Like, you can edit this out, but I think that the house system is the Placidus system, which is a part of Western. It's its own little category within Western astrology. The tropical system and the Placidus system, like,
They just kind of
don't put this part in the actual episode.
They're just mashing parts.
Most people sort of use them together. I don't know if they're actually a part of the same system or not, but Western astrologers tend to use them together. So the house system is, if you've got that 12 slice pie chart, you start out in the far left section, the far left pie slice, when you're looking at this circle. And as you go around, you're going widdershins.
That's counterclockwise for all of you not nerds out there.
Squares.
Very good. Very good.
Hold up. Do you honestly think that there's anybody who's gotten this far in this show and does not know what Widdershins means? Yes, I'm gatekeeping a little bit right now.
Not everybody is the goddamn Wiccan, okay? Jesus.
Right, but do you know what the opposite of Widdershins is if we're not going by a clock?
Shut the hell up.
Yeah, suck it, nerd.
The opposite of Widdershins is withouter shins.
Yeah, it's Deasil, so try not to suck.
No, it's without her shins. You go
Yeah.
with her shins or without them.
You're fucking grounded. Go to your room.
Dude, this is my room.
Well, go to your
lying.
shed. Go to your shed.
Go to the workbench in the garage. Invoke a decent human being.
Just fucking try.
Think about what you've done.
I will not, and you can't make me.
He's right. I can't make him.
Okay. All right. Houses.
So houses. All right. So the houses and what each house represents is essentially a slice of your personality. Okay. And each house is governed by a certain zodiac sign, okay? That is static. That doesn't change, okay? Your first house is the house of Aries. Your second house is the house of Taurus. Now, what your personal chart has representing that first house may be a different sign, but the houses themselves and what they dictate in terms of personality are static. So your first house is basically your personality. What you have, if you have planets in your first house, those are going to show up very strongly. Like when you make a first impression, people are going to see that aspect.
So, okay, I'm just kind of confused. Okay, you said the first house is Aries, right? So what would dictate what goes within that house then, if it's not going by like your sun sign? Like I'm confused as to like what falls within that house.
So hold up, because no matter what your first house is ruled by in your personal chart, that house is the house of Aries. So the thing that it's governing within your personality is what Aries says. All right. So Aries is concerned with like initiatory things, first impressions, the way that you do something the first time, the way that you start projects.
How would you determine what falls within those houses then? Because like any of the natal charts that I've pulled up, they don't talk about like what house shit is.
Right. Okay, so this is why I'm saying your rising sign is really important. Your ascendant is determined by the time and place that you were born, and it changes degrees like every 4 minutes or something like that.
It transits through signs about once every 2 hours. So
sure, but like if for like each degree, it happens very, very quickly. You have 30 degrees for each sign. Okay.
So you're going 30 degrees in 2 hours. It's moving fucking quick.
It's going really fast, which is why it's really important for you to at least know within a few minutes, generally. Like, if you're more than a half an hour or an hour off, like, it could vastly change the way that your natal chart looks when you pull it. But your ascendant is what determines your personal ruler of your first house. So Yara, for you, your ascendant is Pisces, which means that your first house is ruled by Pisces. Now, you also have Aries in your first house, because you don't start like right at the tip of Pisces. You're kind of in the middle, so it goes into Aries as well. But these things are going to have some sort of sway over how your first house, which is the house of your personality, is going to look to other people. And this and your 7th house are probably the ones that are the most visible to other people. Your 7th house is the one that dictates how you interact with other people in like not just intimate relationships, but relationships where you have to deal on a very personal level with other people. So this could be business relationships, it could be romantic relationships, but it's going to, whatever you have in your 7th house is going to have an effect on how you operate in those relationships. So in terms of how those different planets fall, that has to do with where those planets lie in that big picture of the sky when you're born, okay? Your Venus is 12 degrees Capricorn, all right? That's something that is just determined by where shit is in the sky when you're born. The way that it falls on your house system has to do with what your ascendant sign is. So basically, like, you take that static wheel, the houses that all have their own respective rulers, and then you basically overlay your own chart over that. But instead of starting at Aries, you start at whatever your ascendant is. That's probably very confusing.
It very much is.
Think about it like having an inlaid disc that you can turn. You can turn that disc.
Oh, so like a secret decoder ring.
Yeah, it's going to tell you to drink your Ovaltine.
Fuck yeah.
How you turn it, depending on where and when you were born, is going to tell you. It's like how forcefully it's going to tell you to drink your Ovaltine.
You need to fucking butt chug some Ovaltine.
Yeah, that's what yours is saying.
Yeah, that's pretty. I need to butt chug everything.
Yes, no, absolutely everything.
Fuck.
No, but, okay, so I think it's important that you don't really need to focus on that static system. What you need to know about that static system is just that it dictates what each house represents. The house itself, like what are the traits that are being governed by this house? That is set. That is static, not going to change. Okay. The way that you can tell how your planets and how your own personal house rulers are is based off of your ascendant and what time you were born, okay? So wherever your shit falls on here, on this wheel, when you pull it up, like, the numbers that are given to it are based off of what degree of that zodiac cluster, was that planet in the sky when you were born. That's how. There you go. So this is going to be based off of. This is why I was telling you I would say stupid shit. Okay.
Those bright light clusters, the fucking bright light clusters up in the sky. So those are stars.
What does the light bright say about me?
Damn sparkly things. No, but wherever that planet was within the constellation is how you get that designation. Like, your sun is 15 degrees Sagittarius. It's right in the goddamn middle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Yes. Yes, it is. All of those other planets are being ascribed these numbers based on that, all right? Those things don't change, and you can read a natal chart based just on those alone. Where was Venus when you were born? Well, your Venus was at 12 degrees Capricorn. Where was Uranus? Uranus was at 26 degrees Sagittarius, which is why you were born to butt chug everything, okay?
Yep. We're a very fucking mature group here.
One thing to point out with, like, people who are just starting out with doing natal charts would be, like, what would you say the importance of degrees are, or is it something to not even really worry about until you figure out your planets?
I would say don't worry about it at first, because you really want to have a good grasp on what those planets represent and how they affect a person first. You really, the absolute first thing that you need to do is try to get an understanding of what each zodiac sign by itself represents, what those traits are. Go watch that video.
Subtle.
I'm not even like plugging the guy to plug him. It's just a really good video. Like, never mind that I love him, but
it actually is a really good video, because most times you get somebody talking about astrology and they just kind of go on and on and on about all these different things. This dude's video is like really succinct, and you'll get a really quick introduction to what these zodiac signs are without there being a whole lot of drift into suddenly talking about, like, well, here's X, Y, or Z that could be affecting it, and then you're fucking lost in the sauce and you just quit because you're like, fuck it, this is dumb.
Okay, so this kind of pulls into one of my not necessarily complaints, possibly critiques, and or things that I don't quite understand about it. So, just pulling up my shit online, which I know you have said, like, pulling it up online isn't nearly as good as what you can do, like, actually, like, sitting it down and doing all of that shit. But, like, there are some things that I have read with my shit pulled up online that I just completely disagree with and don't make sense at all. So, for example, like, you have my natal chart pulled up, and it has my my Saturn as being in Sagittarius, saying that I'm conservative, I respect traditional authority, and like all of that. Like, I'm supportive of laws and institutions. No, fuck that. I actually hate all of those things.
So I think that possibly part of which site did you use for that?
Astrolabe?
Yeah, this is part of the problem with reading a generically generated description. Here's the thing. Your Saturn is at 22 degrees Sagittarius, but it's also conjunct with your Uranus, which is at 26 degrees Sagittarius, and it's also in your 10th house. So each one of these things is going to have some play on that. And actually, your Saturn is also conjunct your Sun on the other side. So these are all what I was talking about, the relationships that come into play. It's a really good place to start with an online natal reading, but it's not really going to be super specific to you, because all of those different aspects, those relationships between planets and the way that they sit in your house or houses is going to have just as much effect as where the planet sits by itself. But we all have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, no, I'm getting the feeling this is it's like, and based on other things that you had said, as far as like learning astrology and shit like that, it plays very much into the whole concept of the tarot, where each individual card is very much interwoven with prior cards laid before it, along with the fact that, like, if you're just getting into it, you don't fuck with reversals, because that's just a whole nother level kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. So when you're looking at a natal chart, for those who may have a background in tarot, but don't have a background in astrology, there are a lot of similarities in the way that you read these things. So just like you said, it's not just the card by itself. That card is being modified by the other cards around it, and the succession of cards, the order in which they're laid out, for example. And then you're also looking at different planets in opposition, or different planets in conjunction with. And an opposition would be sort of similar to a reversal in tarot, because you've got this thing that's like this force that's kind of fighting against
Yeah.
the forces, they're in conflict with each other.
So another thing, and this is, I guess, kind of a little bit, like, it goes into, there are, like, it's not just conjunct and opposition. Another, like, kind of big relationship when it comes to angles is squares. So a square is basically a 90-degree angle on something. And what squares are basically, like, challenges.
I got a couple of those. I'm pretty fucking challenged. God damn it.
One of the things that, like, kind of stood out to me, like, with your Saturn being Sagittarius and talking about all of this stuff, is it's pretty damn close to being squared to your ascendant sign, which is in Pisces. Pisces is a, like, you know, Pisces wants to have its cake and eat it too. Like, Pisces wants to see things both ways. And, like, the challenge with that is when you see things with your Saturn, even if it's not necessarily these, like, traditional power structures, like, your Saturn sees things in its one way. It's either this or it's that, right?
Right.
And so the challenge is seeing, like, where is the give and take with that relationship. And I only bring that up to bring up the fact that, like, there's so much more to astrology than just where your planets are at on your chart.
Yeah, and what we're talking about here is they're called aspects. So the really important aspects that you're looking at on a chart are those things in conjunction with each other. So that would be things that people disagree about what the degrees are, but within that 30-degree section of a sign, you're looking at each one of those little tick marks. And they may be between two different signs. You may have one thing in Capricorn and one thing in Sagittarius, but if they're within either 5 or 10, depending on who you talk to, degrees, they're going to be close enough to each other that they're going to affect each other almost to the point where they meld and become like one force together. You're also looking at things like squares, as Dreadnought mentioned. That's kind of like a frenemy relationship. You're not exactly enemies, but
like an adversary. Not necessarily against you, but challenging you.
Yes. It's not somebody this isn't a relationship that's necessarily one working against the other, but there is a conflict there. They grate on each other. They have different goals in mind, or different ways of going about getting to the same goals. And then you also have things like trines, sextiles. Those have to do with how many degrees apart two planets are as well. Those are helpful relationships, but they're not as strong as like a conjunction is. A conjunction is a very strong aspect, and an opposition is a strong aspect too. So opposition is where it's, I want to say, roughly 180 degrees between two planets, and there's not a whole lot of wiggle room with oppositions. I want to say it's like 0 to 5 degrees or something like that for it to be considered a true opposition. But those planets are enemies. They hate each other, they fight with each other, and they cause you problems.
There are arguments about, like, the idea that your aspects are more important than the planets themselves. Like, I'm not well versed enough in astrology to say one way or another, but, like, the thing is, it definitely adds that extra degree of, like, okay, there's even more you can read into this now.
The aspects are the glue that pulls it all together. So when you read this generalized thing that you pull up online, I actually recommend Cafe Astrology, because they do have some really, really interesting descriptions for specific aspects. So if say this aspect exists in your chart, your Venus is in opposition with your moon. Your Venus specifically is in Capricorn. Your moon is specifically in Cancer. It's going to have a description of what that is. Now, it doesn't pull it all together in one succinct description of you as a person, but it'll describe that specific relationship within your chart, and it does a pretty good job. So I do recommend that also. I think It gives you a far more in-depth and, might I add, free. You know, if your birth information is accurate, it's going to give you a very good idea of what those aspects are, and that's a really good way to learn too. Is just to go through that and pick your own self apart and see how that applies to you. Because in my experience, their interpretations have been not necessarily spot on. There's always room for interpretation for each individual. But that being said, it to me has been the best site that I have found for like a pre-generated free natal report. It's pretty fucking in depth, honestly.
So one thing that kind of brought up that we didn't really touch on when we were talking about signs were signs as they relate to the elements. Is that something that you can kind of give a quick like overview of? Sure, yeah. So there are 12 signs, as we mentioned. 3 of those signs, there are 4 elements, and there are 3 signs that are connected. 3 signs per element. Correct. So when you're looking at fire signs, you're looking at Aries, you're looking at Leo, you're looking at Sagittarius. Earth signs are going to be Virgo, Taurus, Capricorn. Water signs are going to be Cancer. This one is kind of throws people off, but Scorpio is a water sign, and then Pisces is a water sign also. And then what's our last one? Air. Yeah. Air is Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra. So each one of those signs, the way that they present is with the traits of that sign. So you think of a fire sign, you think of passion, you think about starting things, you think about being really blunt. would you say that they correlate to like the 4 suits when we're talking about tarot? Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about like what an earth sign would present as would be very similar to like what you would see if you saw a bunch of earth in a tarot spread, basically. So generally the focuses, the things that earth signs tend to focus on are going to be things of a practical or tangible nature. So you're talking about things that you can count, things that you can touch. So this will be your stuff, your money, your time, okay? Air signs are going to be focused more on things that have to do with communication. So talking, thinking, writing, communicating in any form. Water signs, they rule over emotions. So it could be, you know, the lighter, broader emotions that like a Pisces might be concerned with, like just the big emotions. Cancer is more concerned with their personal emotions, but they're also nurturers. And then Scorpio is often associated with those more negative emotions, like anger, vindication type, shamey sort of things. But they all have something to do with those major emotional aspects. That's kind of what colors those different signs. So your fire signs are the ones that are going to be more in your face. They're the ones that are going to be showier. They're going to be less concerned with emotional, practical communication things. They have something more fundamental, more theoretical. Not theoretical. Not necessarily, but just conceptual. It's very like it comes from a passion. It comes from spirit. So, I said that about both of y'all. Okay. That's true. We are both fire signs, so...
Fuck yeah! Burn the shit down!
Yeah, pretty much. Here we are. Okay, so, like, we've talked about kind of planets. We touched a little bit on angles and aspects. There we go. That's a word. I'm a languager. But we also talked about degrees a very little bit. Is there anything that we haven't really like touched on that you think is like, if you're starting out with astrology, you need to know these things or at least be cognizant of them?
I think it's fair to note that if you don't know your exact birth time, a lot of your planetary assignments will still be the same or close enough that you can still do a makeshift reading and get a good understanding of what your natal chart looks like. You're just not going to know how they fall within your housing system. So if you don't know your exact birth time, still give it a try, because you may not be able to pick apart your own chart, but you may be able to look at somebody else's chart who does know their exact birth time and place and see how those things interplay if you really do want to learn how the system works. But beyond that, you can still learn a lot about yourself and your own motivations. You may even be able to intuit some things about, say, for example, again, going back to the first house, this is the house of your personality. This is whatever planets and different elements you have within your first house are going to be the things that people see first about you. This would be like when you talk to your best friend about what did you think of me when you first met me, those things that they describe about you are going to be elements of your first house. This is before they knew your deep, dark secrets and all that shit, right? So, if they can really be honest with you about that and they say, well, you came off as being really spiritual and really deep, and you just, there was something about you that just, there's something a lot more complex about you. Okay, well, maybe you don't know where all your shit falls. Maybe you don't know what your rising sign is, but maybe you could look at that and say, okay, maybe my Pluto is in my first house. Maybe my Neptune is in my first house. There are certain planets that have those qualities to them, where you may be able to, you're never going to know if it's right for sure, but that's not the point. The point is that if you understand those planets well enough, you understand the interplay between the planets, you're still going to be able to see a lot of those different aspects, even if you don't know what house they fall into.
And you'll be able to understand them, like, archetypally. Okay, so real quick, before we move on, I'd like to go over the planets and at least do, like, a real, like, quick and dirty of what the planets are, what they do, how someone could generally interpret them in their natal chart.
Okay, sure. So we already kind of talked a little bit about the sun sign. This is sort of like, this is what your birth decided you were gonna be. You are a Virgo. You're not a Virgo, but you are a Virgo, okay?
So that's the sign that when somebody generally says, like, what's your sign, that's the one that most people...
Your most recognizable traits are going to be dictated by your sun sign. Your ascendant, on the other hand, is going to be like the real you and the first impression that you give. Before people start to get that Virgo side of you more as they get to know you, the first thing they're going to see is that your rising sign is Sagittarius, because you're going to come in there and you're going to be way too big. You're going to say way too much. You're not going to shut up. And I'm talking about my own self here, just so you know.
The look on Yara's face is just, yep.
It's his emoji. And the rising sign isn't a planet, but that's one of the big things in your chart. Your moon sign, again, dictates how you process emotions and your thoughts and feelings together. As you go through, let's start from the outside the sun. We're just going to step out from the sun. Earth don't count, okay?
Okay. Yeah, fuck the Earth.
So basically, the way it works is you have the inner planets, but the reason Earth isn't counted is because Earth is where we are observing everything from.
Correct.
So Earth is, for all intents and purposes, Earth is you. Earth is the
I am the Earth.
Well, I mean, yeah, we're both fat fucks, so...
True that. I got my own orbital pull.
Yeah, it's kind of there. I've been reading about relativity, and that's technically not untrue.
I know.
Why are you looking at me like that?
I'm just thinking about orbiting you as a person. I'm
okay.
Why am I always getting the dark side?
Okay, Mercury. Let's talk about it. Let's be about it.
All right, so Mercury, the first planet outside the sun. It's the one that moves around the fastest. This one has to do with your quickness, your communication, the way that you think, the way that you talk, the way that you write even. These are all going to be affected by Mercury and what sign it lands in on your chart. Venus has to do with not just love. A lot of people will associate the planet Venus with sex and with romantic relationships, but it really has more to do with those relationships that you value and what you're looking for in the relationships that you value, what gives value to your relationships. Your Mars, so it's not just about fighting, it's also about fucking.
Just fucking mashing parts.
Yeah. Your Mars sign is the one that's going to dictate how you go about getting the things that you want. So that could be revenge. It could also be getting laid. You know, it can be a lot of things, but it has to do with how you go after shit.
It could be a lot of those two things.
It could be only those two things.
Venus is the general thing. Mars is how I put my dick in things.
Venus is what you're looking for. Mars is how you gonna go get it.
All right, yeah, all right.
So Jupiter has to do with, in part, the way that you learn. It also has to do with your generosity. It's a planet that really magnifies everything around it. So Jupiter tends to be associated with magnanimity or like good luck.
Fortune.
Yeah, but
abundance.
It has to do with
girthy things.
Resources is what I was gonna say, but
yeah,
resources can be girthy.
I'm gonna go with girthy things.
The mid planets, Jupiter and Saturn, are also like a little more personal, but this is where you start to transition into kind of like weird generational shit.
So when you start getting into Jupiter and Saturn, you're looking more at how they affect you, not as much in your day-to-day stuff, but how you operate generally. So Saturn has to do with reputation and with things of value to you. So when you think of the way that Saturn affects you, you think of Saturn as a god. He's a god of austerity. He's a god of
discipline.
Yeah.
What?
Eating his children? No, that was Kronos. Never mind. Well, I mean, close enough.
The way that I've always heard it kind of explained is that, like, if Jupiter is the thing that you gain pleasure from and how you gain pleasure,
the girthy thing,
then Saturn is the discipline that you then impose upon yourself to attain that thing.
Yeah, it's the way you choose to employ discipline. Some people employ discipline by sleeping a lot. You know, some people are going to employ discipline in a very meticulous way. They're going to be very driven by a specific goal. They're going to just be like a fucking shit plow getting to that fucking thing that they want, and they're probably a fucking Scorpio.
So mine is just, my discipline is via butt chugging.
So, like, well, one thing that actually kind of stands out to me with, like, your Saturn being in Sagittarius, and, like, kind of having this thing that was, like, general, like, the kind of general shitstorm thing where it was like, oh, you value the rules and blah, 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 blah. That applies, in my mind, that applies to your magical practice, because when you craft a ritual, you are very much about the rules. You are very much about the steps. You are very much about, this is the context for every step of the ritual.
But the thing about Jupiter, the thing about Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. And so your Saturn is laying in the bed of a planet that's ruled by another planet. And that's the way your whole chart is. Everybody's is. But with that, you have a combination of this Saturn and Jupiter influenced together. So the way that you display your discipline is in the way that Jupiter would do that. So Sagittarius is going to do this in a really big way. They're going to consider every single thing. They're going to be correct about everything. There's no room for error here. And it doesn't matter if it's going to hurt anybody's fucking feelings. It's going to be fucking right. That's Sagittarius.
My discipline is ruled by the girth.
Yes.
There you go.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the mid-planets. We've talked about Jupiter and Saturn. Let's get into the outer planets now, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And, like, Selah, how do you, like, interpret those planets? Because I think the way that I interpret them, you kind of hate.
Well,
because you're wrong, so go ahead and jot that down.
Well, it's not the first time, and it will not be the last time. I'm just constantly wrong. I live my life in varying degrees of wrongness.
And
that's just how I do it.
Well, because I'm going to be 100% honest. Like, my deal is, like, even years into this. And this is just to give y'all an idea of how complex this is. I have been studying astrology for over a decade. If I were to actually count all the years, it's probably closer to 2. And I still have to look up the difference between Neptune and Uranus. Still. Like, what they represent and all that shit. Like, it's, you know, the houses are not so hard for me, but when it comes to the actual planets, like, there are aspects of this shit that even if you've been doing it for many years can still be confusing. So the way that I have to go about remembering this stuff is by the Planet Suite by Gustav Holst. Okay, because he did a piece for each of the planets that were known at the time. And he gave a title to each one of these that was based off of mythology. So, where are we at here? So we're on what, Uranus?
We're on Uranus. So the way that I kind of interpret these is that, like, Uranus and Neptune very much have to do...
Very similar.
Like, they're very similar, and they very much have to do with the same thing. And that same thing, in my mind, is, like, mysticism, occultism.
Okay, so here's where one of my, like, critiques fell on. So, like, with the natal chart that I had pulled up, it had my Saturn that said, like, oh, you respect traditional authority figures, you're thankful of laws and support institutions, whatever. But then it goes into Uranus, and it says, you have a tendency to think all ideas, customs, and traditions from the past are outmoded and irrelevant.
You've done both of those things in real life. I know you in real life. You've done literally both of those things.
But it also doesn't talk about the fact that you've got Aquarius in your 12th house. And the 12th house is one of the houses of transition. And Aquarius is one of the major signs that likes to shake shit up. Okay? They're the ones that want to overthrow I'm not even going to say that because Google be listening, but...
Overthrow the government! There, I said it.
Did it.
These are the known
shit stirrers.
This is the sign that is known to be like the group of rabble rousers. They want to break down the old systems. They want to start something new, but they don't want to start it. They just want to collapse the old things so that somebody that's like an Aries can come in and be like, now we're going to make this new thing. Like,
so basically you're saying, like, I'll kick it down and then Dreadnought's gonna, like, take care of the bullshit afterwards.
So, basically, okay, so the other way of looking at it is like this, right? You have Aries, right? And Aries is, like, an archetype that very much wants to start a new thing. They want to start the thing, and they want to have the concept, and they just go. They don't really care if somebody's with them while they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
But they need that Aquarius to come in and shake up the status quo.
You know, whoever it is. Yeah, but Aquarius is a really good choice because that is what they live to do. That is what that sign exists to do, is to question things and say, is this even really the way that things should be done? Because there's probably a better way and I probably know it. And you know what? A lot of times they're right.
When I think of Aquarius, I think of the album Reinventing Axl Rose by Against Me. Like, that album is a very Aquarius. It's just, that whole album is just like, yeah, everything that we do is stupid, but it doesn't offer any solutions on how to fix anything. It's just trying to kick over the shit that's already there.
Well, that's not always true. Like, a lot of the ways that Aquarius goes about breaking things down is by saying there is a better way and offering that other thing. But the thing is that Aquarians are not initiators. They're not the one that's going to take the torch at the front of the fucking mob and be like, this is what we're gonna do now. They're gonna be whispering things in people's ears like, your mom liked your brother better. You know? They're gonna stir up shit.
That didn't need to be whispered. I knew that for a fact.
But so, and this is where that all comes into play. Like, yes, guess what? You do respect authority. You do respect traditions. But the thing is that Aquarian influence in your 12th house makes it such that those things that you respect, you also use in a way that may not seem to jive with that description that you got from a pre-generated thing online.
Gotcha. I mean, like it's kind of like the same as getting a fucking like, okay, on our Discord server and shit, we've got a thing where you can fucking get a tarot reading from a fucking robot, but it doesn't, like, it'll give you the cards and what the meanings of the cards are, but it's not able to weave them together.
Yeah,
right.
That's very much the same as getting a pre-generated report for your natal chart. It doesn't have the context to look at every level of detail in such a way that it can then weave a narrative. The same way that, like, tarot is very much about weaving a narrative.
Yeah.
It's basically the story of you. When you look at your natal chart, it lays out all these different characters in your personal story, all these different aspects of your personality are being described by these characters that are being played by Venus, that are being played by Mercury, that are being played by Jupiter and Pluto. You know, each one has a stronger role based on where they live on that map in your story, and who they live next to.
So when I was born, the planets were going through their G.G. Allen phase.
When you were born, there was a house party at Sagittarius.
And it was on fire.
And not everybody was invited. And it was right around the time when people were starting to get kicked out.
No, so this is what happened, though, was that Scorpio came and they crashed that party. And all of them people at Sagittarius were like, whoa, what the fuck, whatever. And then the cops, a.k.a. Capricorn, showed up.
Very much so.
That's like most of your chart. You have got 3 other things that aren't within those 3. How are you?
Most
How are you still breathing? Yeah, I know.
Your moon is just real sad that it wasn't invited. Like, you're fucking...
Well, his moon's in Cancer. It's kind of a sad sack moon to have.
Yeah, but like, you're...
Yep.
You're, like, you're...
Sorry, all you Cancer moons. I've been picking on you.
But like, your Chiron is just like, fuck it, I'll throw my own house party.
Parties on parties, dog.
Okay, yeah, your North Node is like...
North Node and Neptune are like, we're good over here, bro. It's fine. Y'all just do what...
Yeah, they're like, we're having our thing. We're just hanging out playing fucking
We're hanging
euchre
out,
or
and
whatever.
Aries, we're starting our own fire over here. It's gonna be fine.
There aren't enough fires.
Like, I'll start a fire myself. I'll be shit.
So, but back to like the Uranus and Neptune and so forth. So, Uranus is the magician, and this was what I was talking about, the whole planet suite. I go back to this, Uranus, the magician. So this is somebody who has like they have that sort of esoteric or sort of spiritual knowledge, and they're the ones employing it. They're trying to change something, or they're trying to make something happen with it. Neptune is the mystic, so this is the planet that rules those things that you just sort of innately know spiritually as a person. So for example, if Neptune is in your 12th house or your 11th house, one or the other, you're probably, or even in your first house. That's going to be real confusing when people listen to this, but
let's go with Neptune in your 12th house. If Neptune is in your 12th house,
Neptune is in your 12th house, Neptune being the mystic, Neptune already knows shit, and your 12th house has to do with transitions and things that are unseen. These are things that cannot be empirically proven. They are under the radar. They're behind the veil. Blah blah blah. Your Neptune is in your 12th house, there is a strong possibility that you are very, very spiritually sensitive. You may hear shit, you may, whatever it is, but, you may very well feel a connection to the other side that, other people that aren't into woo-woo shit might, brush off as you just being a crackpot, but it's something that you know about yourself or that you felt and have never been able to describe. That could be the description or the explanation for why you sense the things that you sense. It's all stuff that can't be described by showing something physical.
So, like, the way that I've always heard those two planets is with the magician and the mystic is kind of the same way, where, like, the Uranus kind of describes how you go about anything magical, metaphysical, spiritual, whatever you want to call it. How do you go about unraveling that mystery, right? Whereas Neptune, for you, is the mystery. Neptune is the thing that you are trying to unravel, that you can't really put your finger on. That's kind of the way that I've heard it described, and I've kind of, internalized that. And other people probably have better ways of describing it. But that's kind of, and that's why I say, once you start getting to the outer planets, the personality of it in your day-to-day life starts to unravel a little bit.
Well, just think of Uranus as external and Neptune as more internal. So Uranus is going to be the way that you try to change things in your life, like a magician. Neptune is going to be the way that you internalize things. So it's going to affect things like what types of groups do you want to hang out with? Where do you want to find your validation in life? What people, what systems, what broader movements do you want to be a part of that give you value in your meat sack?
Okay, yeah.
We have Pluto.
Oh, Pluto's my favorite, though.
Pluto's so fucking dope.
So Pluto is another one of these planets that's so far out there and it moves so slow, just like Uranus and Neptune, that it's said to affect more generations, right? But Pluto is also the ruler of the 12th house. So again, this has to do with things that are unseen, things you cannot prove, and things changing. They can be good changes or bad changes, but it's like the Tower card, all right? It's like, shit's gonna fall apart. Just get used to this idea. And this, it kind of dictates how that transition goes. Things are always going to change. That's the nature of living in a situation where you're bound by the rules of time, okay? Pluto is one of those planets where generally it's not going to have a huge impact on the way somebody presents personality-wise, unless it's in a really strong house within their personal natal chart. So if your Pluto is in your first house, if your Pluto is in your 12th house, if your Pluto is in your 7th house, there are just certain ones that you see it more come out in a person's personality or how they operate, the things that fundamentally make them act in a certain way. But generally speaking, Pluto's just kind of like everybody that was born around the same time as you is going to have a similar impact from that planet. So if your Pluto shows up in one of those really strong houses, then you'll see this very generational thing come out in you more, as almost as if you are it's a representative of your generation in that way.
Pluto is why, every Gen Xer is just kind of a coffee house dickhead. And it's why millennials are obsessed with suicide memes. And it's why boomers are the fucking worst. That's what...
Let's see. Where's your Pluto? It's in his 8th house.
I know that.
There's a lot going on there. So your 8th house has to do with, so you'll read online, it has to do with taboos, but really what your 8th house is about is things that are shameful. Okay, these are your secrets, these are your kinks, this is shit that embarrasses you. These are deep-seated things that make you feel like you're not good enough. All right, and that's kind of that house. Anything that lands in it, you're gonna see those aspects come out in situations where you're embarrassed or where you feel like you're being scrutinized, or that somebody's telling you you're not good enough or you're not acting right or something like that. Okay, so your Pluto being in your 8th house in Scorpio, Pluto tends to have an effect that is very big but also very subtle at the same time. It has to do with the deeper meanings of things and seeing past the illusion, basically. And so does Scorpio. Scorpio is probably the best investigator out of the Zodiac, because when they decide they want to find something out, by God, they will fucking find it. Come hell or high water, they will fucking get it. Don't get in their way. They're gonna fuck it up. They're gonna get what they want. So...
All right.
for you, that's gonna show up in things that, you know, you feel are taboo, things that you feel that people are gonna judge you for. That intensity and that heaviness, that weight of Pluto, that shows up in that part of your personality.
So you're saying I'm very invested in my kinks?
You're very much invested in the things that you derive meaning from that, like, society says you shouldn't.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Well, and it's also conjunct your Mars. Your Mars and your Pluto are in conjunction with each other in your 8th house. So your Pluto and your Mars are both in Scorpio in your 8th house. They're conjunct each other. And what that means is that they're so close together that they almost meld. So the way that you go about things, the way that your Mars does shit, is also going to work with Pluto and those aspects that you carry with Pluto together. So when you go after things, you're going to go after them with a weight. You're going to go after them with gravity and intensity that is, it's so powerful that you can't really fuck with it, but it's also so subtle that you can't necessarily point it out. And now describing anything with you as being subtle is sort of like hard for me to wrap my head around.
I don't believe in subtlety.
But Scorpio is one of the most driving signs of the zodiac. And so when you decide that you want something, you're going to really show it when it's something esoteric. So this is also one of the occult houses, the 8th house, because it has to do with secrets. It has to do with things that you don't talk about. All right. So that to me is a perfect example of somebody who's got a perfect astrological placement that would be in synchronicity with the way that they operate in real life. Like, you are very entrenched in the occult and esoteric knowledge of occult things.
Oh, yeah.
So
One other thing to point out is that Pluto operates as a higher octave of Mars, so those two planets work very well together. Like, those two planets being conjunct, being in the same house, and working towards the same goal means that they work, in my mind, into such a way that, like, sometimes, like, that subtlety of Pluto goes even under the radar of you working actively the way that Mars works.
Fucking in secret. Got it.
I think that's a pretty good overview of how what the planets do at a very
if any of you could actually follow the whole thing.
Yeah.
The planets are very, like, there's this bad rap for astrology, specifically with, like, chart casting, that it's so, like, wishy-washy and it's so you can't really nail anything down. But what that comes from is the fact that everybody has this expectation that it exists in a vacuum. And it absolutely does not.
But the planets exist in a vacuum because they're in space.
But space isn't a perfect vacuum.
No.
Fuck you.
Relativity, bitch. Relativity. Okay.
Your face
anyways,
is relative.
Yeah, it is. It's relatively huge. I got a big head.
It's like a fucking cast iron pan.
It really is. I have done eggs up here before and gotten them perfectly yolky. So Yara, you had questions that at the beginning of the interview that you were talking about like critiques and stuff that you weren't able to find answers for. Did you have stuff that you still wanted to bring up now?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so it made news a while ago, and it's, even though it's nothing new, but the concept of the 13th Zodiac, Ophiuchus.
So basically, what was this in, like, the 80s or some shit? Or 90s or something? Basically, there was a thing that had to do with degrees of astrology, and because of the way things didn't add up, that there is essentially a 13th zodiac, and that anybody after whatever, blah 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 there's now a 13th zodiac that they can
Yeah,
fall
well,
into.
actually,
okay.
it comes from Stephen Schmidt from the book Astrology 14. He actually advocated 14 zodiac signs, including Ophiuchus and Cetus. But it was a couple years ago that the 13th zodiac kind of like blew up. It's like, oh, there's a 13th zodiac sign, which is Ophiuchus. And technically, within the layout, I would fall under Ophiuchus, which was between December 6th and December 31st.
My I feel like this was something that was like addressed. I honestly don't have enough information to really talk about it with any level of authority, but basically, like, the argument was made, like, so this is something that came up in because I want to say in Japan it is recognized. Like, there are 13 signs in Japan, like, when, like, with Japanese astrology now. I don't think Western astrology, like, updated.
Yeah, because Ophiuchus, according to the book Astrology 14, fell between December 6th and December 31st. But that's considering that there are 14 signs. If you take it as just 13, then Ophiuchus would fall between November 30th and December 17th, which I would still technically be Ophiuchus, as I was born on December 7th.
Did you look up any of the traits of what?
Not really. Because, like, the astrological thing was just kind of beyond my whatever. So, like, I didn't look terribly into it. Yeah, so, like, how do you feel as a proclaimed astrologer with the fact that it's possible there could be other zodiac signs?
I would like to interject that I never proclaimed to be an astrologer.
Well, I mean, at least as far as, like, you have studied astrology for over 10 years, I would say that would classify you as an astrologer.
Well, so my opinion on that is Western astrology does not like to change, which is interesting because what it deals with has a lot to do with change and transitions. But those people who have the most sway over how Western astrology is practiced often don't want to add new shit to it. I mean, it took a really fucking long time just to get things like Pluto and Chiron and different asteroids, comets, and
fixed stars.
Yeah, to really have any place for discussion in Western astrology. And even now, a lot of Western astrologers will still treat some of those things as though they're, like, extra hoo-ha sort of bullshit that shouldn't be considered. I think there could very well be some benefit or value to adding those elements into how we interpret astrological charts and astrological events. But I don't think that's going to be a thing that happens quickly.
Okay, so I did pull up some traits from Ophiuchus. This one has lists of positive and negative traits. The positive traits would be tend to embrace and seek change, disliking routine, follow their instincts to a fault, can be impulsive, happy, humorous, are honest to a fault, often described as intellectual and clever, think with their hearts and not with their heads, powerfully passionate, have a great deal of creativity, imagination, and curiosity, people magnets, possessing high charisma, have a strong sense of justice, are great with language, arts, and the written word. And then negative traits would be like, can be jealous, are judgmental and critical, restless and irresponsible, procrastinate as a rule, violent but short-lived tempers, sarcastic with a very dry sense of humor, and tend to only keep useful things, including friends, around.
I mean, so what's interesting to me about that is that it already incorporates a lot of the same traits that you see with Sagittarius. It's like the traditional traits that we associate with Sagittarius. But I mean, if we threw it in there, who knows? I don't think any of it's really invalid, because I think that so much of it has to do with relationships and not just, specific planets in specific constellations and so forth. I don't think it would hurt.
Okay. And that gets to my other question about, Pluto being, considered now a dwarf planet, which kind of racks up, and there are other dwarf planets about the same size. Like, there's the dwarf planet Eris, or Haumea, or Makemake.
You can get those on your chart, it's just you're not going to get them on most charts. Like, you can get those mapped on your chart, but most charts are not going to map
You'll
those.
have to find a site that'll do it. And also, you can get fixed star placements in your chart as well on some sites. So fixed stars are ones that are the same place in the sky all the time. They don't shift at all. Most of the constellations in our zodiac have shifted over the course of, millennia, but that's part of what sidereal.
Yes. Yeah, it's sidereal.
Essentially very similar to tropical astrology, but it accounts for the fact that those constellations have shifted in our sky over long periods of time.
Well, and not just that, it also accounts for the precession of the equinox.
Yeah,
yes.
it accounts for those things, and it accounts for galactic drift, basically to the tune of 1 degree every, I think,
72 years. Yep.
Which, oddly enough, if you talk about fixed stars also drift regardless of what you're talking about, drift about 1 degree every 72 years. So I've done a sidereal chart for myself, and it looks a little different. And you can kind of look at them and compare and contrast things.
On paper, it looks different.
Right, and it's because it's Western primarily follows with tropical. However, Hindu astrology is sidereal,
and there are different interpretations between the two systems of what things mean. So going to fixed stars have very different meanings in tropical astrology versus sidereal astrology. But it's one system that kind of accounts for. I don't even remember how we got onto talking about sidereal astrology.
You can blame me for that.
No, we were talking about my questions and shit. So that was another one, because the universe does change. So we have the precession of the equinox. And, it goes, 1 degree every 72 years, and will cycle to another, house or whatever every several thousand years.
Yeah, and, that's something that, sidereal astrology accounts for.
Okay, and then, my last question, how do you feel about astrology in, the concept of predestination versus free will?
I think astrology is all bullshit.
All right, scrap the fucking episode. Let's just throw this in the trash.
What?
No,
I'm still publishing this. What are you talking about? This is gold.
No, I mean, I think the way that I look at astrology is not that it dictates anything actually. I don't think anything is set in stone. I think it more gives you an explanation as to why certain things fall into place the way that they do, and the different elements that are combating each other or working with each other to make certain things come to light, like a personality, a situation in life. There are a lot of people who are very interested in astrology who are looking at current events at this point in our timeline, things like civil unrest, rioting. I got bunny ears around the rioting, but, a lot of political things that are going on specifically in the United States. And they're saying, well, look at the way these planets are lining up. This would give us, a good equation for these things to be happening and for these things to potentially happen as a result if we harness that energy. It's more an explanation of resources and how they're playing with each other.
I agree with that. I would say that astrology is no more like predestined than a tarot reading is. You're seeing things like if you look at tarot being a tool that you use to look at a given situation that's coming up from a perspective that you might not otherwise have. Astrology is doing the same thing, but specifically with a natal chart, you're doing that to your personality. Okay. It's giving you a set of archetypes to look at and say, well, maybe this is why I was acting this way.
To me, your astrological, your natal chart is like the baggage that you're carrying throughout your life. It's your choice. You still have free will. If you are very self-aware and you know that these are elements of your chart, whether it's bullshit or not, you can look at that and say, okay, this is what I want to change about myself. This is how I want to be a better person. These are bad elements of my personality that I would like to let go of or that I would like to learn how to work around. It gives you context.
Yeah, so like kind of how you had said with like the right angles and shit. So there's a conflict between shit. And it could be that, with my natal chart and whatever, my life is a dumpster fire, but it doesn't have to be. I could combat that. It's just, it could happen this way. It just depends on how I deal with it as a person.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and knowing that your moon and your Venus are in opposition with each other, that they oppose each other and that they're going to be in conflict with each other, if that tells you that the things that you value in relationships are not going to jive well with how you process things emotionally, knowing that could be enough for you to step back in a situation, in a relationship with somebody, or in the patterns that you show in relationships. You can say, okay, this is a thing where like my brain thinks that I want this, but my feelings don't agree with that. And just knowing that can help you to parse that whole thing, figure out what it is that is your priority thing that you want, and use all of those other resources that you have within your natal chart to try to figure out a good solution to get the thing that you want without hurting people or without hurting yourself.
Right, and I can see it as kind of like, with the natal chart, using that as kind of like a roadmap, and at any point, like if you're going through a particular struggle or some shit, stepping back, looking at the natal chart and seeing like, this is how things could go, this is the route I'm going to take.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great analogy.
You're still the one behind the wheel.
Yeah.
But you have a map that you can look at that can show you the best route to get there.
I think it's a combination of the map and the vehicle, though. Because, you know what I mean? Because it's like, here are your options on where to go and how to get there, but also you're driving an 88 Cressida and the transmission is blown. Like,
I feel attacked right now.
Are you the 88 Cressida?
Or are you the blown transmission?
I mean, at least I'm at a point right now where I'm like a 70s Pinto, where if you hit me in the right spot, I'm just going to explode.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. I've always seen myself more as an 81 Yugo hatchback.
You look like one, I'll give you that.
Well, Selah, I want to say thank you so much for coming on and educating our dumbasses about some astrology stuff.
Yeah, there's the flat line again. Just fucking died.
I want to point out again, just for the sake of clarity, that this is an episode specifically talking about Western tropical astrology. This is not even scratching the surface of like sidereal astrology, let alone like Chinese traditional astrology.
No, we'll cover those at a later point. Because, yeah, like, I went hard into Chinese astrology, not knowing exactly what we were talking about, and just Chinese astrology is also just as fucking intricate as Western tropical. Like, it's fascinatingly so. It's a vast difference from, like, going to, like, a Chinese restaurant, and they've got that fucking plaque on there, like, this is the year you were born, this is what you are. No, that's some hot garbage. Thank you, white people,
loyal
for ruining
and
something else.
dependable.
Yeah.
That's the same as going to, like, a Starbucks and getting a thing, and, like, you order it, and someone's like, oh, that's so typical fucking Scorpio. I don't know what happened. Don't even talk to me right now, because my Doritos is in retrograde, and I am going to be a bad person.
My Doritos are in Gatorade. I cannot talk to you right now.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. All right, once again, ladies and gentlemen, Selah is here talking to us about astrology, or has been here. Thank you so much yet again.
Okay, bye.
Are you looking for one-of-a-kind handmade tools to add to your left-hand path practice? West of Hell masterfully crafts items ranging from leather masks to wands made from authentic human bone, all to aid you in your crusade against the tyranny of the demiurge. Prayer beads consecrated to Lucifer or Hecate, hand-etched magic mirrors, and even Chaos Star inverted rosaries are all part of their expanding inventory. Get started on your journey to bring down the powers and elevate your own godhood with tools, jewelry, and apparel from West of Hell. Visit them online at westofhell.square.site. That's WESTOVHELL.square.site.
Hey.
All right, we're back. We made it here. We made it all the way through that fucking interview. Like, man, that was like...
I'm still pretty dumb about it, though.
But,
so.
Okay, and answer me this, though, like, honestly. Do you feel like there is more to it? Like, there's more to the understanding of it than, like... Because you, like, historically, like, you've been very, like, quick to kind of write off astrology.
Oh, yeah.
Do you feel like still kind of that same level of it's all bullshit? Or do you feel like there's a little more to it that was just, like, shit that doesn't come up, you know, when you're talking on some fucking message board about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's more to it, but, like, I would have to, like, do more personal, like, reading into it, if only because, like, at a certain point, if it's not something I'm just reading into, like, without how, complicated it is, my eyes would just start glazing over at a certain point. Because there's so many numbers.
Yeah, it is very, like, if you're not a mathematics-oriented person, it gets real boring real quick.
Yeah, math is not my strong suit.
Well, that's fair. I'm not really good at it, but I like to pretend I am sometimes.
Yeah, just throw out some numbers.
Yeah,
that's cool.
That's all you do. You just n to the 54th. There, people think I'm smart now. Boom.
Yeah,
nailed it.
Like the fucking Jupiters, like in the 75th angle of fucking House of the Sun.
Cards.
House of M.
And that's why you're a dickhead today.
Yeah. My Doritos is in Gatorade. Do not talk to me.
Yep.
All right, so let's switch gears. Let's get to, are we still sticking with quests? Are we still going to call them quests?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure, why not?
That's cool.
I guess, yeah.
All right.
Quests.
All right.
Till we can come up with something better.
Yeah, for sure. So last episode was about Appalachian folk magic, and we had a couple of quests for you, Cologne. How did you, first of all, before we get into the individual ones, how did you find working with that system?
I found it interesting because, at least I found going in, like, working with the like making the Samuel, which I'm just going to come out and be honest, I did not get that made. And one of the reasons is because I kind of got started on that later. Like, I got right on top of making my sachet, but that I got later, and when I was, reading through the book and looking at it, like, it has very specifics, on how to make it. And I felt like at first it's like, well, I don't have as much time, and I want to, so I was going to use substitutions and stuff, but I felt uncomfortable just going through using annual substitution because I hadn't yet. I don't know. If I make substitutions, I want them to be meaningful, and I hadn't figured any meaningful substitutions. But reading through the book more and stuff, trying to understand more about where it's a very different system of understanding the importance of, I think, each of these elements, and different from anything I've worked with, let's say. And as we had discussed in the previous episode about how, comparing it to a recipe book, there's, it's so much more so, I think, than any other system I've worked with.
Yeah, I feel like I can definitely see, it seems to me that folk magic in general is much more, physical component heavy.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I didn't end up completing the Samuel, because, I was, okay, I can get this together, make something, but then I was, more and more, I could, make something with a bunch of substitutions, but I don't really have a strong grasp yet of how important the original ingredients were and what they were meant to do, and I didn't feel like I could make substitutions that could properly do that, or at least that I would, put that similar meaning into myself, and I didn't want to make this thing that would ultimately be useless to me, or, I wouldn't actually see it as useful.
Kind of like how if you were, taking the whole concept of a recipe book, and you're, trying to make a cake or some shit, and you're like, well, it calls for eggs, and I don't have any eggs, so I could just dump some ranch dressing in there. That's white.
Exactly.
Right?
But then if you understood that eggs are there to coagulate, you can use blood instead of eggs, if you understood that. And I didn't have the understanding of what to substitute other than the eggs yet. So, if you're fine, this is the first time I think I haven't gotten something done before at all. I could follow up on it, on the next episode and stuff, because I actually, some of the, things in here include stuff that I could probably get access to in the next month in particular, especially one thing is having taking your red flannel to a Sunday church sermon. Well, as part of my work, I'm going to be sitting through sermons in late July, so I might as well I could actually take advantage of that. So
okay.
So I'm still trying to get my head around. You're telling me you don't want to make Kool-Aid with powdered sugar? Is that what the fuck you're telling me right now?
Essentially, yeah.
But
sure.
No, I understand that, because there, we talk about in chaos magic using substitutions a lot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But the thing that kind of gets lost in that is people don't understand that those substitutions need to have meaning, even if it's only a meaning to yourself. And even if that meaning is only, well, I'm putting this in here because it's mine, right? Because now it makes the work mine, right? But it's important for you to still have that intent in mind, and to still be able to basically trick your ego into thinking that you're doing the same thing. And if you can't do that, then the substitution's not going to work.
Exactly. And there's a lot of obviously plants, plant work, and understanding plants and their uses and stuff, and that's not something that's I'm particularly strong with either. So the roots that are supposed to go into the Samuel, I was well, it doesn't really explain in the book why those roots, other than their roots run a particular one runs east west, other runs north south, but I felt there's something else probably to that than just that. So I wanted to kind of understand if there's other principles to those plants than just which way the roots go. Because I was like, oh, I could find roots, obviously, but I'm like, well, maybe there's something more to like a bearded iris and its meaning and stuff that maybe I could understand, and then find a plant that has a similar sort of connotation for myself and use that. You know, that's what I'd wanted to do.
I just had an image of a hairy eyeball.
I know, right?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So how did the sachet go then?
That I got on real fast, and I'm wearing it right now. You can see it. I put a cord on it so I can wear it around my wrist. And what I ended up making was a sachet. I call it a loved one sachet, and it's full of little pieces of gifts that have been given to me by friends and family and loved ones. So like I literally was like shaving little bits of material off of items, and I have like a full list of all the items and who they're from that I put into it.
Oh damn!
Yeah. There's this year. I mean, there's approximately like 18 like different little pieces inside of it.
Jesus! All right.
Things like candle wax from a candle someone gave me, like pieces from like a thank you card, a tag from a lamzac that someone gave me, a bead from a bracelet that was given to me that broke, to like from a walnut to salt from the ocean that someone gave me. So yeah, all these little elements, and I put it inside of a piece of a handkerchief that was something of my grandparents. I don't know, I got it after my grandmother died, so I cut the handkerchief into a small square and wrapped it in that. And then I know I anointed it with some oils. I think it was... Actually, no, I didn't, because I decided to use the Fast Luck oil that Yara gave me.
Okay.
As part of it, and knowing the elements in that, I felt that worked for what I was doing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and then I braided a cord for it and put a bead at the end so I could wear it around my wrists.
Okay, and do you feel that it's been accomplishing what you wanted?
I think it's been helping. Yeah, I guess I have low expectations. I don't expect things to like happen overnight, but I think it's been helping. Like the purpose of it was to help me and like express my appreciation and love to people more, and try to be more open about that, and to also hopefully draw that to myself. And I feel like having it as a bare minimum as a reminder and wearing it and stuff gives me like a little bit of personal, like, to know I'm loved, you know, and give me like that sort of comfort. So I'm not like, I do have like social anxiety and stuff, and so it makes it like I'm more likely to hopefully like respond to text more easily and be like, don't have that anxiety about how you're responding, or pick up the phone more easily, or pick up the phone and call people more often. I would say it's having an effect. It's gradual, but I would say it's having an effect. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And like that to me demonstrates a really good understanding of how a sachet is supposed to work. Sachets in general are things that are kind of like lower impact, but you spread it out and it's more dispersed. It's something that works more in a long term, very similar to a talisman. They aren't always done for this one specific thing at this one specific time. They're more of like, you have it and it's a daily reminder to do something, or it's a daily draw for something, right? It's not necessarily the most impactful thing, but it does have a gradual buildup and it has a cumulative effect. So very cool. It's like, that's something that I think you've like every like month when you come up, every episode when you come up with something, like your understanding of it is something that I think is like, it needs to be like applauded, because you demonstrate an understanding of a concept beyond like something that would be just, okay, I'm doing this one thing and I'm done, right? Like you created a sachet that is like something that is workable and usable and continues will continue to be useful to you, which is really fucking cool.
Thank you. I also want to use it within the context of I'm not good at remembering these sort of things, but I believe it's green magic is social magic, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and maybe using it when I start working with green magic, using it in that context too, with those rituals or things.
For sure, and like that's something that it will be really useful for, because that green magic being the magic of relationships, like it's like having something that draws that affirmation into yourself and helps you to reciprocate that is going to be supremely useful for green magic.
Word.
All right, so let's move on to quests for this month. And I have a suggestion for doing the divination part of this too, which if you guys are not comfortable doing it is totally fine. But given that we're talking about astrology, what I've done is I've gone ahead and drawn up a chart for today.
Okay.
To look at for when it's time to do divination, and I'll post it up so that we can look at it, and we'll be good to go. But let's get into so quests for talking about astrology and that little bit of like ephemeral astrology that we had talked about. Yara, do you have one cooked up yet, or do you want me to go first?
No, I've got one, which would basically be look into like obviously the aspects of the different planets and plan a very basic ritual, very basic one, and just kind of do them at do it multiple times at different planetary hours and figure out if there was any difference in the outcome based on it being performed at a different hour.
Okay. Sorry, writing notes.
Yeah, no,
for sure.
Okay, and record albums. Okay. Gotcha.
All right. So that basically covers, because mine originally was going to be just work planetary hours into your like practice. But I mean, what Yara's given you is basically what I was going to say. So my quest for you for this month is going to be to you can go to like Cafe Astrology or like Astrolabe, pull up your natal chart and just learn something, like try and figure out some stuff about it.
I definitely had my natal chart done several years ago by a customer of mine from a store I used to work at, and so I've had it around and I've investigated it somewhat. But now after hearing you talk about Dreadnought and the interview, I think I'll have a little better understanding of how to go about, especially understanding those angles and the relationships, rather than just, oh, this isn't this and this isn't that. And
yeah, and like see how your understanding has changed. See if there's anything that stayed the same, and see if there's something there that you like, latch onto, or if you just look at it afterwards and you're like, wait, nah, this is still all bullshit. Fuck it, right? That would be my quest for you. Now, for divination for this, I have drawn up a natal chart. I'm going to go ahead and link it to you guys in chat so that you can take a look at it. That should pull up the whole thing. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll just do a screen share. So, looking at this chart, there's a few things that really stand out to me when I look at it. Like, so the big thing is your Ascendant is in Virgo. Or, well, not your, but like the Ascendant being in Virgo where it's at, the Moon is arguably conjunct with it. It's not, well, no, that's conjunct. It depends on who you talk to about conjunct, right? It's either 5 degrees or 10 degrees or whatever, right? So it's close enough that I would say that they're going to work together. Your Moon being processing feelings, processing emotions, processing all of that stuff. and the ascendant sign being like the information that's coming through, that's being input, right? So that's going to be something where like emotionally it's going to feel like in line with the stuff that you're learning, with the stuff that you're doing, regardless of whether it's like by the rules and by the book. Like, it's going to feel effective, it's going to feel right. The other thing that really stands out to me is your Jupiter and Pluto are like, those are directly conjunct. They are both 24 degrees Capricorn. They're right on top of each other. Capricorn is a sign that is very much like, they think big. They think about like the plan, capital T, capital P, the plan, right? They are analytical. They tend to be kind of fatalistic sometimes. But when Capricorn gets something into its head to do it, it fucking does it, right? So with the two planets there, Jupiter is about abundance. It's about wealth. It's about where you draw pleasure from. Pluto is more of a weird, like, esoteric planet. Pluto is about cycles. It's about things coming to a close. A lot of times it's seen as like the death planet. But it's more about like changes. It's about upheavals. Yeah. It's about things like that. So what I get from that is in Capricorn, there's going to be like a rabbit hole somewhere, right? That you're going to see, you're going to like dive into. It's going to be fulfilling. And it's going to have an outcome, an effect, like a net effect on the way that you think about something. And it's going to be something that's very, like, you're going to feel really drawn to analyze something, right? With that...
Well, it's in my nature.
What else do you have here? Saturn in Aquarius. Saturn is a planet that is about... So if Jupiter is a planet that is about abundance and about drawing pleasure, Saturn is very much like the discipline. It's the curtailment. It's the, like, these are the things I'm giving up to attain these, right? But it's also a planet that's kind of about the rules. If you think about Saturn as a god form, Saturn was kind of an asshole, right? Saturn is kind of like that, like, backhanding, like, no, we're gonna do it this way, right?
Didn't he cut off his dad's dick?
Probably. That's a very Saturn thing to do. Anyhow, so your Saturn is conjunct your Pluto and your Jupiter, but it's in Aquarius. Aquarius are like the rabble rousers. Aquarius are the people that shake things up. Like, okay, the song Age of Aquarius, right? You think about it and it's a dumb sounding song, but that song is about changing shit.
What are you talking about? There's like a joined chorus where everybody sings along.
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous.
This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius.
It's ridiculous, right? Like, it's such a stupid song. But that whole song is about a change in a generational sense, right? Aquarians tend to see time differently. They see it in like chunks. They don't think about like linear time necessarily. So like your Saturn in Aquarius is about like accepting the fact that things are going to change up. It's accepting the inherent instability that comes from any kind of change, right? And it being conjunct with your Jupiter and Pluto in Capricorn is like understanding that any kind of temporary instability is just that. It's going to be temporary. It's part of capital T, capital P, the plan. I think, like, other than that, like, you have some stuff in Pisces. Your Neptune is in Pisces. The Mars is in Pisces. Mars is a planet that is about... It's also cusp Aries, though, so... but Pisces is kind of a... Pisces wants their cake and they want to eat it. right? Like they want both ways. And so like because of that, Pisces kind of catches this bad rap as being very dualistic and very like kind of two-faced about stuff, but realistically it's because they're experiencing this shit happening in a bunch of different ways. With Pisces being the last sign in the zodiac, Pisces is very sensitive to all of the other signs that like are there, right? Pisces is also a water sign. Water signs are like about emotions and thoughts and feelings, the same way that like cups and tarot are about. Yeah, realistically, that's most of the shit that I'm getting from it. Your sun and Venus are conjunct in Cancer. Cancer is again a water sign, which has to do with like emotions being receptive. Cancers are very much those people, like they're real good at sarcasm. They're real good at like saying the things that like want to like they're very good at saying the things that people want to hear, not in a way of like lying, although sometimes they kind of lie about shit. Like Cancers are those people that need to be needed, right? But that's kind of like a darker aspect of Cancer. The thing with Cancer are really good communicators. So I guess like from that I would draw that you're probably going to be able to like communicate the things that you're learning from that. It's also in your 11th house, which is, or no, it's not. It's in your 10th house. Okay, so never mind. Fuck that. I was dumb. Or no, it's, god damn it. This is weird because like the astrolabe charts are from like 2006 GeoCities. So they're like 200 pixels. It's hard to read what's going on with the houses. But yeah, that's more or less what I draw from it is like, there's going to be a change. There's going to be some rabbit holes. There are conjuncts in the way that things are going to be received, the way that things are going to be perceived, the way that things are going to be communicated. There is kind of a square between your sun, your ascendant, and your moon sign. So squares typically have to do, not necessarily, it's not the same as an opposition, right? So an opposition would be like, your Neptune is opposed to your moon and your ascendant. That, like, oppositions are real hard. They're like, they don't get along. They're gonna butt heads, whatever. I just said butt heads. Anyways, I'm mature. A square is more like a challenge, right? There's absolutely like there's a rivalry there, but they're working towards the same shit, right? So with your sun being square to your moon and your ascendant in this chart, like there is going to be kind of a rivalry between the way that you are presenting, or the way that like that this information is presenting itself and the way that it feels. But ultimately, like, they're working towards the same thing. They just go about it in a different way.
Okay.
Is like, that's the best way I can really describe a square relationship. I don't really know shit about, like, sextiles and, like, all of that shit. Like, I'm still, like I said, still learning about it. But those are pretty much the things that I draw from looking at this chart. Now, granted, this chart was cast for from where I'm at, from Kansas City. It would likely look a little different cast from Indiana. But it is what it is. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm drawing from that. From kind of looking at that chart. And so the thing about that is, like, this is the same shit that like when you see a horoscope, right? This is what a horoscope does. A horoscope casts basically a chart for a day and a time and draws information from that. So when you see okay, this is your daily horoscope and it's in the newspaper and there's like 2 sentences about it, understand that that's mostly bullshit, because there's no way you could cram all of the information from a full chart into 2 sentences. It's fucking impossible to do.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think that's pretty much what I've got.
Okay. I guess me looking at it,
and knowing absolutely dick about astrology. Looks like you got a lot of water signs in there, so I'm going to say you're going to have a good slippery time. There you go. There's my reading.
Yeah, you've got 1, 2, 3. You got four water signs. 1 earth sign. Yeah, you've got a good. It's actually a decent-ish spread as far as like water signs, earth signs.
Slippery time.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Good slippery time.
Oh, that's. I mean, I guess going from like my own natal chart, understanding like I have only one water sign in my natal chart.
Extra slippery time.
So it's very different. My personal one is pretty much divided evenly between fire, earth, and air, and then has like one water sign in it.
Just that one loner water sign over there.
Hey guys, want to come over and you just play with the water hose with me? No!
Nobody wants to slip and slide.
Interesting thing about that kind of is I was terrified of water as a child. Like,
hey,
there you go.
Like,
yeah,
utterly terrified of water as a child. They got lots of horror stories from my mother trying to give me babs as a child and me just screaming. So, yep.
Okay. And like just again for the sake of clarity, I know I was saying your sign and your sign, but this is about
the day,
like the chart for the day. It's not like obviously it's not your chart. Whatever the fuck ever. So it'll be interesting.
Today's going to be a slippery day.
What'll be interesting, what I'm actually interested to see is at the end of this, when we do the next episode, seeing how you kind of look at this chart and being like, okay, like this was bullshit because, or, you know, like, no, this made sense. So I'm interested in that, but
I'm looking forward to, looking over my own chart again, especially like the whole things being opposed and stuff. Cause yeah, that's interesting. Just looking at my own chart, I've got that pulled up and mine looks kind of weird.
Dope.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, if you don't mind, like when we're done, I would like to take a look at it and see if I can figure some stuff out looking at it. But otherwise, I think we're pretty much good for this episode. I think we pretty much got it. Is there shit that I'm missing? Probably.
No.
Probably.
We're all missing something. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
I want to say a big thank you to Selah for coming on and talking with us at length about astrology and kind of so Selah's been teaching me a lot about astrology over the last month or so, just learning about shit. I also want to thank our patrons and our sponsors for, doing that shit and helping us to, continue to provide some dope ass content. I also want to throw out a real quick, just real quick, hail skafuckle.
Hail skafuckle!
And I think that's it. We're going to get out of here. We will see you next time. Peace.
Laters.
Be seeing ya.
This has been a production of the Faith Blind Council. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/faithblindcouncil. We would also like to thank our sponsors. You can support us by supporting them. You can also contact us on Twitter at FBC Podcast, 1, on Instagram at FBC Podcast, and via email at faithblindpod@gmail.com.